In the crisp, cold January of 1961, a new era dawned in America. It was an age of youth, of vigor, of intellectual glamour, all centered around a new first family that seemed impossibly, dazzlingly perfect. The world would come to call it Camelot. It was more than a presidency. It was a cultural phenomenon. It was the first White House of the television age, and its inhabitants became the most famous family on earth. We saw the president, a handsome and charismatic leader, steering the nation through the treacherous waters of the Cold War and towards the new frontier of space. We saw the First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, a woman of unparalleled grace and style, who transformed the White House into a vibrant center for arts and culture. And through the magic of this new medium, we saw their children. We saw a little girl with a pony named Macaroni on the White House lawn. We saw a toddler peeking out from under the resolute desk in the Oval Office. They were not just the president's children, they were the nation's children. Symbols of a bright, hopeful, and seemingly limitless future. They were America's royal family born into a fairy tale of power and beauty. But their lives would be defined not by that fairy tale, but by a shocking assassination, a relentless public gaze, and a series of tragedies so profound it would give rise to the legend of a curse. What really happened to the children of John F. Kennedy? In this video, we will tell the complete human story of the three children of President John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, whose lives became a central and often heartbreaking part of the American consciousness. We will explore the dignified and resilient life of Caroline Kennedy, the eldest and the sole survivor, who grew from the nation's sweetheart into a respected ambassador, all while fiercely guarding a privacy that was stolen from her at birth. We will revisit the heartbreaking 39-hour life of their infant son, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, a private family tragedy that became a public sorrow and deeply affected his parents in the final fateful months of the Camelot era. And we will delve into the brilliant, beautiful, and ultimately tragic story of John F. Kennedy Jr., America's reluctant prince who captivated the world with his effortless charisma, before his life was cut short, reigniting a nation's grief for a future that was lost twice. To bring you this story with the depth and respect it deserves, we have consulted presidential archives, authoritative biographies by historians like William Manchester and Thurston Clark, rare documentary footage, and countless contemporary news reports from the era. This is a story about the human heart behind the myth of Camelot. A story of immense loss and extraordinary grace. Number 3. Caroline Kennedy, the survivor, the ambassador, the keeper of the flame. She was the first child to captivate a nation in the television age. A little girl with a sweet smile and a pony named Macaroni, who became for a time America's princess. But how did the most famous child in the world grow up to become one of its most private and dignified public servants? How did she survive the unsurvivable, all while carrying the weight of a monumental tragic legacy? This is the story of Caroline Bouvier Kennedy. Born on November 27, 1957. Caroline Kennedy's life began at the epicenter of a political dynasty hurtling towards its zenith. At the tender age of 3, she moved into the White House, a place of formal halls and secret stairways that became her personal playground. The American public was utterly enchanted by her. In an age of anxiety, she was a symbol of innocence, hope, and the vibrant energy of her father's new frontier. Her mother, Jacqueline Kennedy, a woman who understood the power and the peril of the public eye, was fiercely protective. She established a kindergarten inside the White House to give Caroline and other children a semblance of normalcy. But the goldfish bowl of their lives made that nearly impossible. Caroline was everywhere in newspapers, on magazine covers, a constant beloved presence in the national narrative. Then, just 5 days before her 6th birthday, the fairy tale ended in the most brutal way imaginable. Her father was assassinated in Dallas. The world watched in horror and disbelief, but for Caroline and her little brother John, it was the sudden violent loss of their daddy. In the immediate aftermath, Jacqueline Kennedy's primary all-consuming mission became shielding her two surviving children from the relentless trauma and the suffocating public gaze. She moved the family from the memories of Washington, D.C. to a new life in New York City, creating a fortress of privacy around them. Jackie's famous mantra to the press was simple: leave them alone. Caroline grew into a thoughtful, serious, and intelligent young woman, deliberately and consciously avoiding the celebrity path that was so readily available to her. She attended the best schools, Concord Academy, Radcliffe College at Harvard, and later earned a law degree from Columbia University. She sought a life of substance, not of fame. For years, her primary and most cherished roles were as a wife to the artist and designer Edwin Schlossberg, whom she married in 1986, and as a mother to their three children, Rose, Tatiana, and Jack. In a remarkable achievement, she successfully raised them far from the media circus that had defined and damaged her own youth. She co-authored books on constitutional law, and tellingly on the right to privacy subjects she understood with an intimacy few could ever imagine. For decades, she rarely gave interviews. Her public silence was a powerful statement of her desire for a normal life, a life that was her own. However, the call to public service, the central driving ethos of the Kennedy family, was always present. Slowly, carefully, she began to step into a more public role, but always, and importantly, on her own terms. She became the president of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, working tirelessly and effectively to preserve her father's historical legacy for future generations. She became a key figure in the Democratic Party, not as a politician herself, but as a powerful moral compass. Her endorsement of Barack Obama in 2008 was a pivotal moment, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. In 2013, her journey came full circle. President Obama appointed her as the United States Ambassador to Japan. It was a role for which she was uniquely suited, and she served with distinction, earning widespread respect for her diplomatic skill, her intelligence, and her deep commitment to the alliance. Later in 2022, President Joe Biden appointed her as the U.S. Ambassador to Australia, another high-profile critical post she has handled with her signature grace and professionalism. Caroline Kennedy's story is one of extraordinary resilience and quiet determination. She survived an unimaginable childhood trauma and the immense crushing pressures of her name to build a life of purpose, dignity, and strength. She is the last of the immediate Camelot family, the keeper of the flame, who has honored her family's legacy not by reliving the past, but by tirelessly serving the future. Caroline's life is a testament to resilience and the quiet continuation of a legacy. But before she and her brother became the sole heirs to that legacy, there was another child, an infant boy whose brief flickering existence would become one of Camelot's most profound and public sorrows. Number 2, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, the 39-hour tragedy. In the warm, optimistic summer of 1963, the Kennedy family and an adoring nation eagerly awaited the arrival of a new baby. The child was a symbol of Camelot's vibrant, continuing future. No one could have imagined that this joyous, anticipated event would turn into a national vigil of heartbreak that would deeply and permanently scar the First family. This is the story of Patrick Bouvier Kennedy. On August 7, 1963, Jacqueline Kennedy, 5.5 weeks from her due date, went into premature labor while at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. She was rushed to a hospital at the nearby Otis Air Force Base and gave birth to a son, Patrick, via emergency cesarean section. He was small, weighing just 4 pounds, 10.5 ounces, and he was in immediate severe respiratory distress. The baby was diagnosed with what was then commonly called hyaline membrane disease, a condition where a newborn's lungs are not fully developed and cannot provide the body with enough oxygen. Today it's known as infant respiratory distress syndrome and is often treatable with modern therapies. But in 1963, it was a near-certain death sentence. A frantic effort to save him began. The newborn was rushed by ambulance to the renowned Boston Children's Hospital, where the best doctors in the country fought to save his life. President Kennedy, who had been in Washington, abandoned his duties and flew to his son's side. For 2 agonizing days, the president and the entire nation held their breath. JFK, a man the world saw as cool, collected, and in command, was seen pacing the hospital corridors, his face etched with a raw paternal anguish. He would periodically enter a high-pressure experimental hyperbaric chamber where doctors were treating Patrick just to be near him, to hold his son's tiny hand. This public display of a father's raw, desperate grief was unprecedented for a president at the time. It shattered the formal barrier between the office and the people humanizing JFK in a profound and deeply moving way. He was not just the leader of the free world. He was a terrified father, helpless in the face of his child's mortality. Despite all heroic efforts, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy's tiny lungs gave out. He died after just 39 hours of life. The nation mourned with its president. President Kennedy, a man known for his stoic, almost detached public demeanor, was seen openly weeping at his son's funeral, a heartbreaking image of a powerful man brought to his knees by loss. The death of Patrick had a profound impact on John and Jacqueline Kennedy. Many biographers and close friends believe the shared intense grief brought them closer than they had ever been. It stripped away the last vestiges of the glamour of Camelot and forged a deeper, more intimate bond between them. This newfound closeness makes what happened just 3 months later in Dallas all the more tragic. The death of their infant son was a private tragedy that played out on a public stage, a sorrowful, heartbreaking prelude to a far greater, nation-shattering one to come. The loss of Patrick was a private tragedy that foreshadowed a public cataclysm. From the ashes of these immense sorrows, one figure would emerge as the focus of a nation's hopes, dreams, and unending fascination, the little boy who saluted his father goodbye, John F. Kennedy, Jr. Number 1, John F. Kennedy, Jr., America's reluctant prince. He was born into a myth and he died a legend. He was in a way that no one had been before or has been since America's son. A man who spent his entire life trying to be himself in the shadow of his father's ghost, all while being one of the most famous, most photographed, most obsessed over people on the planet. This is the brilliant, beautiful, and ultimately tragic story of John. Born on November 25, 1960, just weeks after his father was elected president, John F. Kennedy, Jr. lived his earliest years on a global stage. The world fell in love with John, the adorable, mischievous toddler playing under the resolute desk in the Oval Office. He was the living symbol of the youth and promise of his father's administration. His most enduring image, however, is one of profound tragedy, the perfectly timed, heartbreaking salute to his father's casket on his own 3rd birthday. That single innocent gesture of a son saying goodbye to his dad seared him into the collective memory of the world forever linking him to his father's tragic death. Like his sister, he was raised under the fiercely protective and loving wing of his mother, Jackie. He grew into a stunningly handsome and effortlessly charismatic man. He was determined not to be a mere celebrity or a dilettante living off his name. He attended Brown University and New York University School of Law, and for a time, he worked as an assistant district attorney in New York City, a serious job he took seriously. But the press and the public never let him be. He was dubbed the sexiest man alive by People magazine. Paparazzi followed his every move. His dating life was national news. He carried the burden of being a public heartthrob with a mixture of grace and visible frustration, always seeking a life of more substance. His most defining professional venture was his boldest act of self-definition, the founding of George magazine in 1995. It was a glossy, clever, and surprising political magazine that aimed to merge the worlds of politics and pop culture under the tagline, "Not just politics as usual." It was his attempt to demystify the world his father had dominated to make it accessible and relevant to a new generation. The magazine was a reflection of him, smart, stylish, irreverent, and a little rebellious. It was his way of engaging with his legacy on his own modern terms. In 1996, he did the one thing many thought impossible. He got married in a secret ceremony on a remote island off the coast of Georgia, brilliantly outwitting the press that had stalked him his entire life. He wed the beautiful and intelligent Carolyn Bessette, a fashion publicist. Together they were a global obsession, a couple of impossible glamour and style. But they were also a couple visibly strained by the relentless, suffocating media pressure. By the summer of 1999, John was navigating a difficult period. George magazine was facing financial trouble. His marriage was reportedly under the strain of their intense public life. On the hazy evening of July 16, 1999, John, a newly licensed and relatively inexperienced pilot, took off from an airport in New Jersey in his single-engine plane. With him were his wife Carolyn and her sister Lauren Bessette. They were heading to Martha's Vineyard and then on to a family wedding in Hyannisport. They never arrived. The plane disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean. For 5 agonizing days, the nation and the world held a vigil, hoping against hope for a miracle. But it was not to be. The wreckage of the plane and the bodies of John, Carolyn, and Lauren were eventually recovered from the ocean floor. At the age of 38, the son of the slain president, the boy who was America's prince, was gone. His death felt like a cruel, unbearable final chapter to the Kennedy tragedies. It was a devastating loss of unfulfilled promise that plunged a nation and the world back into a state of profound mourning for a fairy tale that had long ago ended in heartbreak. The story of the Kennedy children is a uniquely American epic. It is a story of a fairy tale that became a national tragedy, a story of immense promise and profound, repeated loss. The grace and dignity with which they, particularly Caroline, navigated their extraordinary lives remains a powerful and deeply moving lesson in resilience. This theme of a great American family navigating the aftermath of a monumental historical event is something we've explored before on this channel. In a previous video, we examined the complex life of General Robert E. Lee, a brilliant military tactician whose choices during the American Civil War irrevocably shaped the nation and his own family's legacy for generations to come. We explored the man behind the uniform and the difficult, controversial path he walked after the war. You can watch that fascinating story by clicking the link right here. And just like the Kennedys, his children had to find their own way in a dramatically and painfully changed world. We are currently developing a deep dive on this very topic called Robert E. Lee's 7 Children, The Untold Story. To explore that fascinating and often overlooked chapter of American history, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss it.